Picture this: a 9-year-old boy, standing alone on the Mongolian steppe. No food, no shelter, no clan, no father. The man who was supposed to protect him was just murdered, poisoned by a rival tribe at a feast, and now his own people, his own kin, have abandoned him and his family, left them on the open plains to die. It is the 12th century. This part of the world has no mercy. The steppe is vast and brutal and cold. Wolves circle families at night. Rival clans raid each other for sport. Children die of exposure. Women are taken as slaves. And a boy without a clan? A boy without warriors to protect him? He is already dead. He just doesn't know it yet. That boy's name was Temujin, and here is what nobody, not his enemies, not the tribes that abandoned him, not the rulers of China or Persia or half the known world, could have possibly predicted. That abandoned child would one day rule an empire so massive that it covered more land than any empire in the history of the human race. He would conquer China. He would bring the Islamic Caliphate to its knees. He would send shockwaves into Eastern Europe. And he would do all of it starting from absolutely nothing. No money, no army, no title, no throne. Just a boy on a frozen steppe. Who decided he was not going to die? But here's what the history books leave out. The real story of Genghis Khan is not just a story of conquest. It's a story of betrayal, of psychological warfare so sophisticated that modern militaries still study it, of a man who was enslaved, hunted, and humiliated, and who used every single one of those experiences as fuel. And it starts with one question that historians have argued about for centuries. Was Genghis Khan a monster? Or was he a product of a world that was already monstrous before he arrived? Stay with me, because the answer will genuinely surprise you. Before we go back, let's talk about what Genghis Khan became. Because most people have a vague impression. A Mongol warlord, a destroyer, lots of horses, lots of bloodshed. Maybe they know the empire was big, but they have no real sense of how incomprehensibly, jaw-droppingly dominant this man was. Let me try to give you a sense of the scale. At its peak, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean all the way to Eastern Europe, from Korea in the east to Hungary in the west, from Siberia in the north to the Persian Gulf in the south. It was the largest contiguous land empire, meaning land connected by borders, not separated by ocean, in all of recorded human history. Not Rome, not the British Empire, not Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan and his descendants. The empire covered roughly 24 million square kilometers. To put that in perspective, that is larger than the entire continent of Africa. But the numbers almost miss the point. What Genghis Khan actually did was upend the entire political order of the medieval world. Kingdoms that had existed for centuries, gone. Civilizations that considered themselves untouchable, shattered. The Islamic Golden Age, arguably the most sophisticated intellectual culture on the planet at the time, centered in Baghdad, ended violently when the Mongols arrived in 1258. And here's the thing that makes this story so hard to look away from. Genghis Khan did not come from wealth. He did not inherit armies. He did not have powerful friends or a strategic alliance handed to him at birth. He built all of it, from the step up. So how? How does a child with nothing become the most powerful conqueror in human history? The answer starts with understanding the world he was born into. Imagine a world with no cities, no walls, no permanent structures, just open grasslands stretching to the horizon in every direction. What the Mongolians call the Great Steppe. This is where Temujin was born, somewhere around 1162. The exact date is disputed by historians. Even the sources we have are unreliable. But the place and the circumstances are well enough documented to give us a vivid picture. His father was a man named Yesige, the leader of a small Mongol clan called the Borjigin. Not a powerful clan, not a famous one. But Yesige had a reputation as a warrior, and that counted for something out here. The steppe operated on one iron rule: strength. If you had warriors, you had security. If you had security, your family ate. If you lost your warriors, through battle, through disease, through political fallout, you were finished. Children starved. Women were enslaved. Men were killed or scattered. There was no law, no court of appeal, no neighboring kingdom you could run to. Just the endless grass and the wind and the understanding that your survival depended entirely on the loyalty of the people around you. Now here's where the story takes its first dark turn. When Temujin was around 9 years old, his father Yesigay decided it was time to find him a bride. This was completely normal for the time. You betrothed children young, sealed alliances through marriage, built your network of loyalty. Yesigay rode with his son to a neighboring tribe, the Ongjarat, and arranged a betrothal to a girl named Borte. The families agreed. Temujin would stay with Borte's family for a while, as was custom. Then he and his father parted ways. Yesigay turned home. He stopped along the way at a camp of Tatars, a rival people, who offered him food and drink as a gesture of hospitality. He accepted. He was dead within days, poisoned. When the news reached his clan, something extraordinary happened. And by extraordinary, I mean extraordinarily brutal. The clan that Yesigay had led for years? They simply left. They packed up, took their animals, and abandoned Temujin's family on the steppe. A widow with young children was a liability. They didn't want her. They didn't want the responsibility. Temujin's mother, a woman named Holan, was left alone with her children, some as young as toddlers. No animals, no protection, no food. This is the moment that defines everything that comes after. Holan was remarkable, whatever the historical record can tell us about her, and it's limited. She was a survivor. She fed her children by foraging. Wild plants, berries, rodents. She kept them alive through sheer will. And she seems to have instilled in Temujin something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. A deep, burning sense of injustice, and an absolute refusal to accept it. The years that followed were some of the hardest in Temujin's life. And here's something that gets overlooked in most tellings. They also included a moment of violence that Temujin himself initiated. He had an older half-brother named Begter. The family was already on the edge of starvation, and by some accounts, recorded in the secret history of the Mongols, which is the closest thing we have to a primary source on his early life. Begter was taking food meant for the younger children. Was it selfishness? Was it a different understanding of hierarchy? Historians debate this. What happened next is not in dispute. Temujin and his brother Kasar tracked Begter down and shot him with arrows. They killed him. Temujin was probably 12 or 13 years old. What was going through his mind in that moment? We can't know for certain. But the secret history records that Holan was furious. She compared her sons to wild animals. And yet Temujin shows no apparent remorse in any account we have. This is the first signal of something that would mark his entire life. Temujin was capable of ruthlessness toward anyone he considered a threat, even family. Loyalty and survival were his only true currencies. Everything else was negotiable. Shortly after that, something happened that tested everything. A rival clan, the Taichiat, raided Temujin's small camp. He tried to flee and hide in the forest, but they found him. They captured him and brought him back, and what they did next was deeply humiliating by the standards of steppe culture. They put him in a kang. A kang is a wooden yoke, a heavy board locked around the neck and arms, forcing the wearer into a position that makes it nearly impossible to eat, sleep comfortably, or even scratch your own face. It was a device used for prisoners and slaves. It was designed to break a person psychologically as much as physically. Temujin wore it and was passed from family to family within the Taichiat clan, used as essentially a servant. Humiliated. Controlled. A warrior's son reduced to a captive. But here's what nobody expected. During a feast, when the guards were distracted by celebration and drink, Temujin made his move. He managed to escape. He fled into the night. According to the secret history, he hid in a river, submerged up to his neck in cold water to avoid detection while the Taichiats searched the banks. A man named Sorkin Shira, a member of the Taishiat who had apparently shown Temujin small kindnesses during his captivity, saw him hiding in the water. Their eyes met, and Sorkin Shira, according to the account, said nothing, turned away, let him go. Temujin eventually made it to safety. He found his family. He survived. And years later, when Temujin was powerful, he tracked down Sorkin Shira and rewarded him. He never forgot a kindness. He never forgot a betrayal either. That's one of the most important things to understand about him. Genghis Khan is remembered as a destroyer, and in many ways he was. But he was also extraordinarily precise about who he destroyed and who he rewarded. He remembered everything. He built his empire on that memory. Around this time, something else happened that would define his adult life in a profound way. He had not forgotten Borte, the girl he was betrothed to as a child. He went back for her. They married, and then, almost immediately, Borte was taken from him. A rival people, the Merkits, raided the camp in the night and kidnapped Borte. This was a direct act of revenge. The Merkits had an old grudge against Temujin's family. Holan, his mother, had herself been taken by Temujin's father years earlier under similar circumstances. Borte was gone for a period of months when she was eventually rescued because Temujin raised enough allied warriors to launch a rescue. She was pregnant, and the question of who the father was has haunted historians ever since. Temujin claimed the child as his own. He named the boy Jochi, which means, roughly, the guest. Whether or not he truly believed Jochi was his son, or whether he accepted him out of political necessity and love for Borte, no one can say for certain. What we know is that Jochi's legitimacy was questioned for the rest of his life and created devastating rifts in the Mongol royal family. But that is a story for later. Right now, Temujin has his wife back, he has his freedom, and he has something new. He has allies. The raid to rescue Borte required warriors he didn't have, so he called on two men. One was a childhood blood brother named Jamucha. The other was a powerful chieftain named Togrul, Khan of the Karates, who had been a sworn ally of Temujin's dead father. Both came, both helped, and both would eventually become his greatest enemies. The relationship between Temujin and Jamucha is one of the most fascinating and heartbreaking in this entire story. As boys, they had been blood brothers. Anda in Mongolian. They had sworn oaths to each other, exchanged gifts, slept side by side under the same blanket. If you wanted to understand loyalty and brotherhood in steppe culture, this was what it looked like. And for a while, as young men, they rode together again. Their combined forces grew. They were building something real, a confederation of clans under shared leadership. Then a split happened. The sources are vague on exactly why. Some say Jamucha made a move that Temujin interpreted as a threat. Some say the two simply had fundamentally different visions for how power should be organized. Whatever the cause, the result was that their alliance broke apart and warriors had to choose sides. Many chose Temujin. And this is significant because Temujin seems to have treated the ordinary warriors and herders of the steppe differently than Jamucha did. Jamucha came from a more traditional aristocratic mindset where birth determined your rank. Temujin promoted based on ability and loyalty. People noticed. But here's where it turns dark. The early warfare between the emerging factions was brutal, even by steppe standards. In one battle, the Battle of Dalan Baljut, around 1187, Jamucha defeated Temujin decisively. And then he did something that permanently positioned him as the villain in Mongolian cultural memory. He boiled 70 of Temujin's captured officers alive in cauldrons. It was an act of terror. It was designed to send a message. The message it actually sent was different from what Jamucha intended. Warriors across the steppes saw it and were horrified. Temujin, in contrast, developed a reputation for treating defeated enemies who submitted to him with relative dignity. He was still capable of mass violence, but he didn't torture for spectacle in that way. And in a world of brutal choices, people made calculations. Temujin spent years after that defeat rebuilding, slowly, patiently. It was not a straight line upward. There were losses. There was a period. Historians estimate somewhere between 1187 and the mid-1190s, where Temujin essentially disappears from the record. We don't know exactly where he was or what he was doing. Some scholars believe he may have been held as a vassal of the Jin dynasty in northern China during this time. Others think he was simply consolidating in the shadows. What we know is that when he re-emerged, he was different. More patient, more strategic, more willing to play a long game. And then came the betrayal that closed a chapter of his life forever. Togrul, the Khan of the Karates, the powerful chieftain who had helped rescue Borte, the man Temujin called father, turned against him. The exact sequence of events is complicated and disputed, but the essence is this. As Temujin grew more powerful, he became a threat rather than an asset to Togrul. A plot was formed, possibly also involving Jamukha, to eliminate Temujin. He was lured to what was supposed to be a meeting and barely escaped an ambush with his life. He fled with a tiny, exhausted group of followers to a place called Baljuna Lake, the famous Baljuna Covenant, a moment that Mongolian tradition treats with almost sacred significance. Happened here. Temujin and his most loyal companions drank the muddy water of the lake together, swore absolute loyalty to each other, and pledged that if they survived, they would share everything. The group at Baljuna was small, desperate. They had almost nothing. But the men who swore that oath at that lake? They would become the core of the Mongol imperial army. There is something deeply human about that moment. The image of a man who would one day rule the world, crouched at a muddy lake with a handful of starving companions, choosing to believe in a future that by any rational measure did not exist yet. Within 2 years, Temujin had recovered, gathered new forces, and returned. He defeated Togrul. He defeated Jamukha. Jamukha's end deserves special attention. When he was finally captured, tradition holds that Temujin offered him mercy, offered to restore their brotherhood. Jamukha refused. He asked instead for a noble death, a death without bloodshed, which in Mongolian culture meant the earth could receive his spirit whole. Temujin granted it. Whether this exchange happened exactly as recorded, we can't be certain. But the story that was preserved says something profound about how Temujin understood loyalty, loss, and the cost of the choices he had made. Jamukha, his blood brother, his greatest rival, died at his command. And by most accounts, Temujin did not celebrate. By 1206, Temujin had done something no one had ever done before. He had united the Mongol tribes, all of them, the Tatars who had poisoned his father, defeated and partially absorbed, the Merkits who had kidnapped his wife, crushed, the Naimans, the Karates, the Taishiats who had once enslaved him, all brought under one banner. The steppe, which had been a patchwork of rival clans in constant, exhausting conflict for generations, was unified under a single leader at a great assembly, a Huriltai. On the banks of the Anon River, the leaders of these unified tribes gathered, and they gave Temujin a new name, Genghis Khan, meaning, roughly, universal ruler, oceanic ruler, ruler of all. He was probably in his mid-40s. He had been fighting, scheming, surviving, rebuilding, and outlasting his enemies for his entire adult life. Now here is what made him genuinely different from every conqueror before him. Genghis Khan built a system. This is the part that gets underplayed in the popular image of Mongol hordes just charging around destroying things. He rebuilt the Mongol military from scratch. He abolished the old tribal unit structure, where you fought alongside your blood relations, which meant your loyalty was to your tribe, not your commander. He replaced it with a decimal system. Groups of 10, groups of 100, groups of 1,000, groups of 10,000. And every single group had a leader chosen on merit, on demonstrated ability, not on birth. He banned the raiding and looting of allied clans, a practice that had been the main driver of steppe conflict for centuries. He established laws around property. He created a system for distributing the spoils of war that gave a share even to the families of soldiers who had died. He introduced a proto-postal system across the steppe, relay stations with fresh horses that allowed messages to travel astonishing distances quickly. This system would later evolve into the famous Mongol Yam network, the most efficient communication system in the medieval world. And he was, and this is genuinely important, religiously tolerant. In a world where religious difference was used to justify slaughter constantly, Genghis Khan exempted religious leaders of all faiths from taxation and made it a policy to leave local religious institutions alone in conquered territories. He consulted Buddhist monks, Taoist scholars, Muslim imams, Nestorian Christian priests. He was personally animist, following the traditional Mongolian shamanic religion. But he seemed to find all religions equally interesting and none of them automatically threatening. This is not what people expect when they think of Genghis Khan. But it's documented. He also built his intelligence networks obsessively. Before attacking any kingdom, he sent traders and spies months or years in advance. He knew the terrain. He knew the internal politics. He knew which commanders were competent and which were corrupt. He knew where the food stores were and where the water sources were. When the Mongols finally attacked, they were rarely surprised. Their enemies almost always were. And then there was his psychological warfare. The Mongols weaponized their own reputation. They would send messengers ahead of an invasion offering terms. Surrender peacefully, and your city will be spared, your people protected, your leaders kept in place. Resist, and everything is destroyed. And they followed through, on both. Cities that submitted were often treated well. Cities that resisted or that killed Mongol envoys, which was considered among the worst possible violations of steppe ethics, were destroyed with a thoroughness that was legendary. And the word spread. Survivors fled to the next city and told what they'd seen. The next city's will to resist crumbled before the first arrow was fired. It was not mindless violence. It was calibrated terror. And the distinction matters enormously for understanding how this empire was built. The campaigns that followed are staggering in scope. The first major external target was the Xixia, a kingdom in what is now northwestern China. Then came the Jin dynasty, which controlled northern China. These were not small operations. The Jin had millions of subjects, fortified cities, advanced weapons, technology, crossbowmen, engineers. They had walls. The Mongols had something more important. They learned. Fast. Early in the campaigns against settled civilizations, the Mongols encountered siege warfare, walled cities they couldn't simply ride around. So Genghis Khan did what he always did. He absorbed expertise. He recruited Chinese engineers. He adopted siege technology, catapults, battering rams, techniques for diverting rivers to flood fortifications. He made his nomadic cavalry into a force that could operate in every environment. The fall of Beijing, then called Zhongdu, in 1215 was a turning point. Witnesses described the bones of the slaughtered piled so high they could be seen from a distance, and fires burning for weeks in the ruined city. The numbers are almost certainly exaggerated in the sources, but the destruction was real and documented. But the campaign that truly shocked the medieval world was the one nobody saw coming, the Khwarezmian Empire. This was one of the most powerful Islamic states of the era, controlling a vast territory covering modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and more. Its sultan, Muhammad II, was confident in his strength. His empire had millions of soldiers. Its cities, Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench, were among the wealthiest and most sophisticated in the world. Genghis Khan initially sent a trade caravan, merchants carrying goods, an overture to establish diplomatic relations. Muhammad II made a catastrophic error. He allowed his governor to massacre the caravan and execute the traders. Then, when Genghis Khan sent ambassadors to protest, Muhammad executed them too. Killing ambassadors was the one thing that guaranteed a Mongol response of total annihilation. Genghis Khan believed deeply in the inviolability of envoys. In steppe culture, ambassadors were sacred. What Muhammad did was unforgivable in Genghis Khan's worldview. The campaign that followed was devastating beyond description. The Mongols didn't just attack from one direction. They divided into multiple forces and attacked from directions that seemed militarily impossible. through deserts, through mountain passes. They appeared where they weren't supposed to be able to appear. Muhammad's army, spread out trying to defend an enormous border, was picked apart. Bukhara fell. Samarkand fell. Urgench fell after a brutal siege that ended in large-scale destruction. Muhammad too himself fled, chased across his own empire by a Mongol pursuit force, and died on an island in the Caspian Sea, reportedly cold, starving, and completely broken. Contemporary accounts from the Islamic world describe the campaign in apocalyptic terms. Scholars wrote that nothing like this had happened since the time of Noah. Whether or not that captures the historical reality precisely, it captures the emotional reality of the survivors. And yet, here is the paradox. In the ruins of those conquered cities, Genghis Khan was leaving behind something else. The Mongol Empire was becoming the largest free trade zone in the world. Merchants could travel from China to the Mediterranean under Mongol protection. The Silk Road was never safer or more active than during the height of Mongol power. Ideas, goods, technologies, and diseases traveled along those routes. The Black Death, which would kill a third of Europe's population in the 14th century? Many historians trace its westward spread along the Mongol trade routes. Gunpowder technology moving from China to the Middle East and eventually Europe? Same routes. The Mongol Empire was a catastrophe and a connector simultaneously, one of history's most terrible contradictions. There are things about Genghis Khan that don't fit the simple narrative, the monster version or the misunderstood genius version. Let me tell you a few of them. He was almost certainly illiterate. The man who built the most powerful empire in the world could not read or write. He ruled by memory, by spoken word, by his extraordinary ability to understand people. He did commission a written script for the Mongolian language, adopting the Uyghur script, specifically so that his laws and decrees could be recorded. But he himself likely never read them. He had a complex relationship with death. He ordered mass killings. That is documented and undeniable. But there are also documented cases of him sparing skilled artisans, engineers, scholars, and physicians from cities he otherwise destroyed. He seemed to understand human capability in a very cold, pragmatic way. A mason who could build things was valuable. A poet who could write was interesting. A common soldier defending a wall was an obstacle to be eliminated. He was superstitious in ways that influenced military decisions. Genghis Khan consulted shamans before major campaigns. He believed deeply in omens, in the will of the eternal blue sky. Tengri, the supreme deity of the Mongolian animist worldview. He saw himself as the instrument of Tengri's will. This was not just political theater. By all accounts, he genuinely believed it. And that belief gave him, and his soldiers, a sense of cosmic inevitability that was itself a psychological weapon. The question of casualties. Historical estimates of deaths attributable to Mongol conquests range enormously, from tens of millions to numbers that some scholars suggest represent as much as 10% of the world's entire population at the time. The lower estimates are still staggering. The higher ones, if accurate, make the Mongol conquests among the deadliest events in human history by proportion. But here's something that complicates the picture. In Central Asia, the region most devastated by the Khwarezmian campaign, archaeological evidence suggests that some areas did not recover demographically for centuries. Irrigation systems that had sustained agriculture for generations were destroyed and never rebuilt. Entire civilizations' intellectual output, books, manuscripts, accumulated knowledge, was lost. History has no clean heroes and no clean villains. Genghis Khan built things that endured and destroyed things that cannot be recovered. Both are true simultaneously. His personal life was more complicated than a simple warrior narrative. He had multiple wives. Borte was always the principal wife, the one whose children were his recognized heirs. He clearly loved her, in whatever way a man of his world understood love. When she died, she outlived him slightly, actually. It was Genghis Khan who died first. The sources suggest she remained central to his life in a way that his other relationships did not. He died before the empire was finished. In 1227, during a campaign against the Shishia, who had refused to provide troops for the Khwarezmian campaign, which he considered a betrayal, Genghis Khan died, He was probably in his early 60s. The cause is uncertain. Some sources mention a fall from a horse. Some mention illness. A later tradition even suggests he was killed by a Shishia princess he had taken as a wife. None of these can be confirmed. What is confirmed is that by his orders, his burial site was kept secret. No monument, no tomb. His men, according to tradition, killed everyone they encountered on the journey back from the burial so no one would know the location. The site has never been found. Genghis Khan, who had spent his life being known, feared, and remembered by everyone, chose to disappear from the earth without a trace. What do you do with a legacy like this? The empire he built didn't die with him. His sons and grandsons expanded it further. Kublai Khan, his grandson, would complete the conquest of China and found the Yuan dynasty. Another grandson, Hulagu, would destroy Baghdad and end the Abbasid Caliphate, the western branch of the empire. The Golden Horde dominated the Russian steppe for over 2 centuries and fundamentally shaped Russia's political development. In Mongolia today, Genghis Khan is not a figure of shame or ambivalence. He is the founding father. His face is on the currency. The international airport in Ulaanbaatar is named for him. He is seen as the man who took a collection of starving, quarreling tribes and gave them an identity, a law, a purpose. In China, in the Islamic world, in Eastern Europe, the view is more complicated. In those places, the word Mongol carries a different weight. The memory of what was lost, the cities, the libraries, the lives, doesn't fade quickly. And then there is the genetic legacy. A 2003 study in genetics suggested that approximately 0.5% of all men alive on Earth today, roughly 16 million people, carry a Y chromosome lineage that traces back to a single man in Mongolia around the time of Genghis Khan. That's not definitive proof it was Genghis Khan himself. It could be an ancestor or descendant, but the timing and geography align. The number of children he fathered and the number his sons fathered across a continent means that his biological descendants are numbered in the millions. He may be the most reproduced human being in history. The Pax Mongolica, the peace that the empire enforced across its territory at its height, genuinely enabled an era of trade and cultural exchange that had no precedent. Technologies, crops, goods, and philosophies moved between civilizations that had previously been isolated from each other. The world became more connected because of the Mongol Empire. It also became vastly more dangerous to live in during the conquest phase. His legal code, the Yasa, established principles that were radical for the time. Religious tolerance, merit-based promotion, protection of diplomatic envoys, prohibition of theft within the empire. These were not trivial innovations. Military scholars still study Mongolian tactics, the feigned retreat. Drawing an enemy into a trap by pretending to flee was a Mongol specialty that broke armies who hadn't encountered it. Their ability to coordinate multiple forces over vast distances, their intelligence gathering, their logistical planning, all ahead of their time. If Genghis Khan had been born into the 21st century, historians agree that he would have been an extraordinary figure in whatever field he chose. That judgment, of course, ignores the millions who died, but it speaks to the sheer, terrible scale of his capability. Somewhere on the Mongolian steppe, historians and archaeologists still don't agree on exactly where. There is a grave. No stone marks it, no inscription, no monument. By Genghis Khan's own instruction, the earth closed over it and the grass grew back and the location was erased. The man who was the most powerful person alive for the last 2 decades of his life chose to leave the world without leaving a mark. Think about that for a moment. Here is a man who spent decades making the entire world know his name, who reshaped borders and dynasties and trade routes and populations. And in the end, his specific instruction was, no tomb, no monument, no way to find me. Why? We don't know for certain. Some scholars think it was practical. A marked grave is a target for enemies. Some think it was spiritual, shamanic beliefs about the soul's journey. Some think it was something harder to articulate, a private reckoning. But here is what I keep coming back to. Temujin started as a 9-year-old abandoned on a steppe. He had nothing. He was treated as nothing. He survived by foraging and by the ferocious will of a mother who refused to let her children die. He was enslaved. He was betrayed by the men he called father and blood brother. He drank muddy water at Baljuna Lake and swore an oath to a handful of starving followers that they would survive this. And then he changed the world. Horribly, beautifully, irrevocably. The story of Genghis Khan doesn't resolve into a neat lesson. It doesn't fit in a box. He was not a hero. He was not simply a monster. He was a human being shaped by a world of extraordinary violence, who became extraordinarily violent in return, and who, along the way, demonstrated strategic brilliance, genuine loyalty to those he chose, and a ruthlessness toward those who broke his code that had no ceiling. The step that abandoned him as a boy never stopped following him. Everything he built, the organization, the loyalty structures, the merit-based promotion, the intelligence networks, was built by a man who understood, in his bones, what it felt like to be disposable, and who decided he would never feel that way again. The world remembers his name. He made sure of that. The one thing he didn't want anyone to find was where he finally rested. Make of that what you will. If this story hit you the way it hit me when I first really dug into it, do me one favor. Share it with someone who loves history. Not because the algorithm needs it, but because this story deserves more than a Wikipedia summary. Subscribe if you want more like this. We go deep here, every single time. And drop in the comments. Do you think Genghis Khan was a product of his world, or something beyond it? I read every one. Do subscribe and like. Tell me which story you want next.